Welcome to the New York City Casey Stengel chapter of SABR, the Society for American Baseball Research. My name is Evelyn Begley. I'm the chapter president, and tonight joining us, we have Damian Begley, who is our director at large and temporary treasurer. We also have Kevin Carter, our secretary, as well as our website administrator. And finally, we have Marc Gold, our chapter vice president. And to celebrate our SABR Day meeting, Marc invited his friend, Jay Horwitz, who had worked 40 years for the New York Mets. After this conversational interview, there will be time for a Q&A, so feel free to type your question into the chat box, and we are asking everyone to mute themselves because Jay is joining us by phone. Clear, cheerful voice, but we need everybody except Marc and Jay at this point to please mute yourselves so we can begin. Thank you, Marc. Thank you, Jay.
Hi, all. This is Marc. And Jay, it's great to see you. I think to see you, I see your phone. And I know we've had a couple of issues to get this, so get your video up there. But we're going to do this without your video. And I hope you're doing well. And I'm just going to review what's up with you. In January of 1980, that's when the New York Mets ownership was sold by the family members of the original owner, Joan Payson, to Sterling Equities, which is led by Fred Wilpon. In February, Frank Cashin, who had won 2 world championships with the Baltimore Orioles, was brought in as the new general manager. In March, Jay left his job as sports information director at Fairleigh Dickinson University as he was offered a position with NBC's Game of the Week, involving statistician work, which he planned on accepting. At this time, Arthur Richmond was leaving his job as PR director of the Mets to become their traveling secretary. While considering the NBC job, Jay was contacted by the Met Vice President Jim Nagorny that told Jay that the Mets were looking to fill the open PR position. Jay promptly told NBC he was not accepting the Game of the Week statistics position and flew to Florida to meet with General Manager Cashin. This led to a fascinating job interview, which Jay called the worst job interview ever. Well, Jay accepted the PR position with the Mets, director position with the Mets, on April Fool's Day, 1980, which fortuitously will bring us to another April 1st, 1985, and the legend of Sid Finch to be discussed later. Met fans get ready, wrote Patterson Morning News writer Kevin Kernan after Jay was hired. It doesn't matter how many games the Mets win or lose this year, they're going to get their share of ink. The reason for this is a man named Jay Horwitz, a man with a gift. Jay, thanks again for being here tonight. Typically, I'd say first things first and ask you about how you felt as a kid, giant baseball fan when it was announced that they were moving to San Francisco. But you have to tell us about the worst job interview ever. Jay, what was that all about? What happened during that interview when you went to see Frank Cashin? You had an appointment to see him and you went up there and saw him, and it was the worst job interview ever. What happened? I'll give you a hint. You spilled orange juice all over the desk. Jay, are you with us?
I think he's on mute.
Jay, on mute. Jacob, you're on. Can you do something with that? Well, I could tell you about that interview if you want, but I think you got to hear it from Jay.
Why don't you begin, Marc?
Well, as Jay was sitting there with Frank Cashin, there was some orange juice that he had either brought in or was sharing breakfast with Frank Cashin, and he spilled the orange juice all over the desk, and it got all over Cashin's clothes, and it was a total mess. And Jay wound up leaving the interview sure that he would not get the position. But he did. And he became the PR director of the Mets for somewhere over 40 years, which is quite incredible. Jay
Mark, could you hear
originally,
Mark?
who's it? Yes, this is Mark.
Could you hear me?
Now I hear you.
Can now.
Yes,
Now I hear you.
yes.
This has been awful. I know what's going on here. Well, let me start from the beginning, Mark. I got the question. So I have a bad sense of direction, number one, to start with. I was supposed to go to the Edgewater Beach Hotel. That's where I thought I was going. But unfortunately, Frank was at the old Hyatt, which was by the Airline Stadium. So I got to the interview about 45 minutes late. I was petrified, So I walked into the restaurant, and there Frank Cashin, the GM of the Mets, two-time world champion with the Orioles, is sitting there at his table in a little white tennis outfit. I proceeded to knock over this gigantic pitcher of orange juice all over his lap. And Frank wasn't happy. I was nervous as anything. And he asked me, first question he said, I hear you were a reader, Jay. Have you read Brosnan? And I thought that was written by Shakespeare, but he's talking about Jim Brosnan, a pitcher with the White Sox. He asked me one other question, and he said, well, that's all we got, Jay. Thanks for coming. So that whole interview lasted about 2 or 3 minutes. I got in a cab, went back to St. Pete Airport, and I called my late mom. I said, Mom, there's no way I got this effing job. Well, about 4 or 5 weeks later, they called me, and I got the job, and 46 years later, I'm still here.
That's quite amazing that you got the job after something. So they decided that they wanted you. It didn't matter whether you spilled the OJ.
Well, let me back up a little bit. See, at that time, in the late 80s, in the late 70s, the Mets were a bad team. They weren't looking for an old-fashioned stat guy. They were looking for somebody with a little humor, who was able to play some offbeat stories. That's what I did my whole career at Fairleigh Dickinson, where I came from. So that's why they hired me. They were looking to get a different slant on things. The first story I wrote for the Mets is about Lee Mazzilli wanting to be a speed skater to go to the Olympics. I wrote a story about Doug Flynn singing with Loretta Lynn in a nightclub in New York. So I try to get all these stories that really had nothing to do with the game results to try and help publicize the team.
Well, what happened
at
Fairleigh Dickinson? What happened? What were some of the crazy things you did?
Well, I was at Fairleigh Dickinson from 72 to 80, and I was not a lot of great teams, but a lot of offbeat outfits. To give you an example, I had a 43-year-old priest who played hockey. I had a 47-year-old freshman football player. I had an Arab and Israeli goalie on the same soccer team. I had a priest with 5 kids. I had a baseball player who worked in a munitions factory during the heart of the Vietnam War. And our best athlete was a kid named Franklin Jacobs, who was 5'6", and he jumped 2 feet over his head and set the world record at the Milrose game. That's how I got the attention of the Mets people, because I was able to publicize these kind of offbeat stories. And that's what they wanted. They wanted somebody who, was able to get stuff in the papers unrelated to wins and losses.
It's quite amazing. There was the high jumper that he never high jumped before. He was a basketball player. He was a 5'8" basketball player.
He was a basketball player. He started high school. Well, we talked that I got to follow. I was the SID, Sports Information Director at Fairleigh, and I went to the track meets, and I saw this little kid, 5'6", jump, can dunk, and win everything. So decided to go out. I followed him at the track meets, and he was. Yeah, anybody remember? It was an American high jumper at the time, Dwight Stones. We're talking about
right.
In the late 70s, early 80s. Dwight was an Olympic champion, and Frankie would beat him in meets. And I got to the point right before the boycott. The U.S. boycotted the Olympics in '80 with Russia, and Frankie never got to go to the Olympics, so he would go around the country, jumping at meets and winning most of the meets, and it's quite an experience. He was quite the athlete, and unfortunately, because of the boycott in '80, he never got to compete in the Olympics.
Wow. The last time you and I met was now your position is vice president of the Alumni Association, and you're
that changed in 18. After the 18th season, Jeff Wilpon was one of our owners there. Said, "Listen, Jay, we don't do a lot of stuff for our alumni. You work with most of these guys who want to switch jobs." And honestly, I wasn't too crazy about it at first. I like to travel. I like going around the country with different restaurants. But then I decided maybe I could do some good and to bring, some players back to the Mets family who kind of were estranged, who were estranged from the family. And that's what I did. I think we've done some good things through the years with number retirements.
Those are great things with the Alumni Association before the retirements. And I want to ask you something about a retired person that should be retired. But at the Alumni Association, which is when I saw you last, you did Jack Fisher, which is up there on the screen now. And then you also had Felix Millan. And at that same day, you had Ron Hunt. I happened to be there going to the game that day. And I was told by my son, my son, I was going with my wife, and my son called up and he said, "Dad, Ron Hunt is going to be at the alumni thing." And Hunt was my favorite Met as a kid. So I went there and I'm sorry. And you remember that day?
He was our first All-Star. Ron was the first All-Star. So Jack Fisher started the first game at Shea Stadium, and one story with him. And the field I was the opening of the World's Fair in April of '84, and he couldn't warm up in the bullpen. He couldn't warm up in the field, so he asked Casey if he could warm up in the bullpen, and that started the whole procedure of starting pitchers warming up in the bullpen and not on the field. And Ron Hunt, of course, was known for getting hit by a pitch, and Felix Millan was, one of the best second basemen we have ever had. And a couple of years in a row, he played 162 games in a row.
That was seeing Hunt was the fact that he was there. And Ev, if you go to the next slide.
Unfortunately, he's not feeling great right now. See, those are the kind of guys the fans like. I found one thing in doing this job. You don't have to invite back the all-star guys all the time. They can be guys that people would identify with and have stories attached to them. And a guy like Ron and Jack and Felix were great guys. And, Jack is like 81, 82 years old, still cognizant, can still speak well, and has a great sense of history, and is still a Met fan.
Yeah, those were great days. I've seen Craig Anderson at Old Timers Day a couple of years ago. It was unbelievable. He was he won 2 games of a doubleheader in 1962 and never won another game in his life.
He won 2 games, and he that's what I enjoyed about the job. When I tried to do when I first started the alumni job, I got a Rolodex to start calling guys who really were part of us for a while. Like, we had the first guy in his 62 draft was a guy named Hobie Landreth, and I called and introduced myself, and he said I was the first guy from the Mets to call him in over 50 years. Wow. And so that's what I'm trying to, it's just to reach out, when they have milestones, when somebody dies, I send flowers, anniversaries, just try to let these guys know we're a part of our history, that the Mets give a damn. That's one of the main parts of my job.
It was great. That thing was with the Alumni Association when they saw Hunt was incredible. Let's move on a little bit to Dwight Gooden, where Dwight, when he joined the Mets, I guess it was in '83, and there was a quote in your book that Dwight Gooden has Mets brass smiling, which was a headline in one of the newspapers in March of '84. And Davey said that we expect Gooden in '84 to do for the pitching staff what Strawberry has done for the outfield. What was your mission? What was, when this all started with Dwight Gooden, who was the year after Darryl joined the Mets, all of a sudden there was a turnaround. And this is after the Seaver disasters of losing him twice. How do you lose?
Right. Well, just to back up, in '83, Dwight was with Lynchburg. He struck out 300 batters. So in the last day of spring trading in '84, Davey called Dwight into his office and said, "You made the team." And honestly, there's a lot of pushback from the front office. They didn't want a 19-year-old kid to make the team, but Davey fought for Dwight. He went on to win the Rookie of the Year that year. And my job was to kind of protect him. The late Mel Stoddard, I used to have dinner with him a lot of times during the year. And what we try to do, the mistake I made with Darryl, we said yes to too many interviews. And we try to curtail that a little bit with Dwight, the limited press access to once a week. But one of my jobs in '84 was to be kind of a protector and, do group interviews instead of a lot of individual interviews. And, it makes it back up. The one thing you talk about '84, the main reason we had the best run in our Mets history from '84 to '90 was Davey Johnson, who unfortunately passed away last September. He was a guy who put everything together. He was a player's manager, let the players play. We had rules, but he enforced the rules when he had to. But the guys loved playing for Davey, and that's one of my jobs. In '84 was to kind of rectify some of the mistakes I made with Darryl and not let Dwight do every interview that they wanted him to do.
It's interesting that if you go back a couple, there was a picture shown just now, Jay, of the press box that's named after you, the Jay Horwitz press box, and that's indicative of what you had been doing. All the press that the caring, according to throughout the book, these players talk about you, how you treated them.
Well, you know what?
Watched out for them.
What I tried to do, Mark, is to treat the 25th guy on the team like the number one guy. I didn't only cuddle up to the star players, the all-star players. I tried to let these guys know I was interested in their families, their schools, any problems that happened. And I think, New York is a tough place for a PR guy to succeed. And one of my missions was to, every time I went down to a locker room before and after the game, I would go to different lockers. How you feeling, Vance? What do you need, Joe? And I think that swept through that I cared about them. I didn't just treat them as a uniform. And I've been fortunate through the years that when I call these guys to do stuff, most of the time, they'll pick up the phone and, talk to me. Like a couple of years ago, we had our first big old-timers day game. We had 68 people back, and, we could have had a lot more. I just try to let the people know that we give a shit. That basically is what I've tried to do. And, whether it's Darryl Strawberry or
there was a headline. What you did for the team, there was a headline in the Jersey newspaper that said Jay Horwitz, the Mets PR director, was breathlessly racing through the press box, saying this was the first time, I guess it was in '84, since 1970 that the Mets were in first place this late in June, which was, as a fan, I remember those days, all the days of losing, games of losing, and the turnaround with those two guys. And what? So much of it had to do. Go ahead.
What's up, Mark?
So much of it had to do with the PR, with the press. Sure, you had talented players, but you had to want to watch them. And if you didn't see the press that said what was going on, so you watch whatever was The Price is Right or whatever it is, or Jeopardy, and not bother with the Mets. So you got people switching from Jeopardy to you guys. Which was pretty much amazing.
My mission in those days, I cared about my job. Wasn't more than a 9-to-5 job, and I let the players know I was there for them. I was concerned about their welfare, and I guess in return, they cared about me. And fortunately, I've been able to keep up those relationships for years and years and years. I still speak to Dwight and Darryl regularly. I speak to Art Shamsky and Cleon Jones and Ron Sabota from the '69 Mets, and I got very close to the Hodges family. Irene Hodges when we elected Gil a couple of years ago. It's all about being a people person and letting people know that you care. It's baseball. I always get a laugh. My NFL friends say, "Well, we have 20 games this year." Well, there's 162 games, 30 more in the spring training. And to be fortunate enough in the postseason, and maybe another 30, so you're talking about 200 games. I went from like an 8-year span in the '80s, and I went to every game for like 7 years in a row. So it didn't let much
Davey
time.
Davey was such a respected manager, and some of the quotes that said, Ron Darling said, with Davey Johnson. So sad that Davey passed away recently. I guess it was in November. With Davey, this is Darling said this. With Ron Darling said, with Davey, you knew he was the smartest guy in the room, and he wanted you to know it. He didn't care about that he was maybe talking too much or bragging or expressing himself where he shouldn't. But he said, this is all in the book. This was amazing. There was a press conference that you organized during the '83 World Series. I don't remember who was in that World Series.
Yeah.
And
Davey, I remember what he said. He said he asked Frank Casher why it took him so long to make him the GM. Davey was a brilliant guy. Went to Texas A&M, a math major. He didn't really have to take the job, Mark. He's a licensed pilot. a millionaire from his real estate business. But Davey was just what we needed. I think from 84 to 90, we averaged over 90 wins a year. And if they had the wild card back then, we would have been in the playoffs every year, and that was
the dynasty that
yeah.
didn't
And
happen. That's what that
we're
was.
gonna have a reunion now, late summer, the 40th anniversary of the '86 team, and unfortunately, a lot of guys won't be there. Guys like Davey and Gary Carter, Bill Robertson, Mel Stottlemyre, Vern Horscheit, won't be there. So it's gonna be good to celebrate. I just wish we had more of the guys there to celebrate. And for me, '86 wouldn't have happened without Davey Johnson.
This is what Davey said. I want to quote this from this great press conference that you set up in '83. Davey said, "I want to thank Mr. Cashin for having the intelligence to hire me." And he also said, listen to this. He said, "I'd like to go along with the percentages, like Earl Weaver, but I have a better idea of what I'm doing." It's so great. It's so ballsy.
But that was Davey. He had gumption. He wasn't afraid to speak his mind. And that's what the media loved Davey, because he didn't duck, didn't give yes or no answers. And he again, we were the 84 to 90 is the longest stretch of success we've had with the Mets in the 60 years of their existence, and it wouldn't have been possible without Davey's leadership.
I want to go back to something. When just shortly before you were hired, and the Mets had lost Seaver twice. First, they lost him, they traded him because of them, Donald Grant, whatever that was all about. And the second time they lost him and they didn't protect him in a draft. And they lost him a second time. And he wound up pitching a no-hitter with one team, winning his 300th game with another team, and then part of the '86 World Series with another team, which is interesting. Who was the pitcher on Boston? Bruce Hurst, who said that just having Seaver on the bench on the losing Boston Red Sox, he learned so much just from having Seaver.
Yeah.
How did the Mets wind up?
Tom was a good friend. What the whole thing was that Frank Cashin, who owned up to the stake, thought at the time that because of Tom's age, nobody would take him. And unfortunately, he was wrong, and somebody took him. So, I mean, that's the unfortunate part of it. And then we traded him in 1977 to the Reds, was part of the his contract problems that he had.
Yeah, that was it. I wanted to ask you about getting away from Seaver. The Met announcers. There is the original announcers, Lindsey Nelson, Ralph Kiner, and Bob Murphy, who I grew up with for all those years from 62 to 78. And I had my preferences. I loved Bob Murphy and Ralph and Lindsey was a Brave fan, I thought. And Ralph was always saying these great things. And Bob was such a devoted crier when the Mets lost. He was so sad. And then Gary and Howie. But why did everyone make the Mets Hall of Fame except for Lindsey Nelson? Is there a story there?
Good question. We do have a little honor of him on the wall with a microphone next to the other two guys. I came in '80. Lindsey's last year was '79, and we talked about before maybe sometime in the near future we could rectify that. But Ralph and Bob are in the Mets Hall of Fame. Probably Lindsey should be too.
Right, we think so. Moving forward from that always bothered me that Lindsey. Not that I loved Lindsey before. He was just so happy all the time. Didn't matter whether the Mets were winning or losing.
Yeah, he had good clothes. A lot of sport coats.
Good clothes.
Sport coats.
Right. When Davey came out with quotes before the '86 season, and the Mets had lost in '85 and '84, they first started building, and he started saying things like, "We will dominate." How did the press react to that?
They loved it because they gave him a headline. I was in spring training. Last year at St. Petersburg, and the year before, we had won 98 games, just missed by a game of qualifying for the playoffs. And it was a clubhouse thing, and he said, "Listen, guys, no, we're going to win. We're going to dominate it." So we wound up going 2-3 in our first 5 games. And Davey spoke at the welcome home dinner, and I remember his speech verbatim. He said, "Guys, don't get nervous. We lost 3 games this year. We're not going to lose many more the rest of the year." So we lost 51 regular season games the rest of the year. We wound up 108 and 54, and then we won 8 more in the postseason. 4 against Houston, 4 against the Red Sox for 116 wins. Davey was brash and bold, and he wasn't afraid to put himself out there because he believed in his team and he believed in what the guys could do.
Ron Darling said, other teams considered us one of the most obnoxious teams of all time. And Keith said, I like Davies saying that stuff. He thought it was a shrewd move on Davies' part. Davies a winner.
Because Davey knew what kind of team he had, Mark. He knew the guys how they would react to it. When we got to more fights that year, if anybody hit Darryl, if anybody hit Ray Knight, it was always a fight.
Wait a second. Talking about fights. You're jumping ahead. Wait till you're going to fights. We're going to talk about fights now. Now, the Mets had a reputation of somewhat of a reputation because of 1973 and Bud Harrelson and Pete Rose,
right.
That classic fight back there. But then came 1986, when just like with most of the obnoxious teams of all time, how could the players?
They hated us.
Hated you guys. It was amazing. And then you get to that game on July 22nd, 86 with Ray Knight and Eric Davis at Cincinnati. Strawberry was kicked out of the game, and the Mets were shorthanded. What went on? What do you remember about that
Kevin
game?
Mitchell was kicked out of the game by 3 or 4 guys. And Gary wound up playing third base. And then the outfield, Jesse Orozco and McDowell wound up alternating pitching because we were short outfielders.
In the bottom of the 10th was the fight. Eric Davis pinch ran, believe it or not, for player manager Pete Rose.
Right.
And he stole second and he stole third. And he crashed into
Ray Knight.
And what happened?
When Eric got up, when Ray got up, when Eric got up, he clocked him. And that started the whole brawl. And it wasn't just a mamby-pamby kind of thing. Guys were actually swinging at each other. We had some, big bruises there. We had, had Darryl and Ray Knight and Kevin Mitchell, and what I remember at that game, we had Keith Hernandez turned one of the greatest double plays I've ever seen. He came in, they had first and second and 1 out, and he came out on a ball and, got the ball in one bounce and threw the third to Gary, threw the tuffle for a double play. What's remarkable about that game is that, Franco was pitching for the Reds at that time, and Dave Parker dropped the ball in the 9th inning that let us tie the game, and I think we won the game in the 13th inning when Howard Johnson hit a home run, 3-run homer. I think we won the game 6-3.
Yeah, that was quite a night watching that game. And then what you did a couple of a month later or less, when all of a sudden there's a picture in the newspapers all over the country of Darryl Strawberry, Mike Tyson, and Doc Gooden. How did you manage to get how did you get them together?
Tyson's people called us because they were knew about our reputation of getting to fights. And this was before Mike Tyson became a champion, and he wanted to come down and see the boys. So we brought him on the field, and we saw the idea to have Mike be the referee between Darryl and White, and that picture got an awful lot of play. It really did. It was all over the country, the Daily News, and I think our reputation as fighters was well known, and I think that's why Mike wanted to come down, to do that, and this is before he became the champion. It was before he became the champion. So
that was quite.
The players weren't the only one to get in fights. Bill Robinson got into a couple of fights, and and Darryl was very protective of the pitchers, the hitters. One time somebody threw at George Foster, and Darryl charged the mound. And so it was a different time now. You see very, very few fights now on the baseball field.
Yeah, that's too smart to risk getting injured, right? Or something like that.
Yeah.
And now there's with replay, just things have changed, and there's just no more controversy on plays anymore, which I find, which is a whole other subject. So Davies, they're building the team, and you had Darryl and you had Doc, and there's one great story that you told in the book where Davey was worried about. This goes back to the early days of Doc when he was doing so incredible, and Davey wanted to remove him from a game because there was a 10-1 lead, and it's the 7th inning, so give him a couple of innings off. And you talked about how Davey asked you to have Cashin give you a note that Davey could come out when he's removing Doc from the game and wave it at the crowd who was booing because he came to get Doc to show the note that Cashin approved it. What was that? That was so funny. What was that all about? Did that really ever happen?
I think Davey must have called the press box. Mark, I don't really remember that verbatim, but Davey probably had to call the press box, ask if I could help with that, and I think that's what we did to let them know the big people above approved of what we did.
Yeah, it was obvious. I think obviously it didn't really happen, but it was just a great story that Davey told about how wonderful it was having Doc in there and throwing you into the mix. That you were the person that was gonna get cash into. Okay,
yeah. Davey and I had a great relationship, Mark. He would confide in me with things and ask my advice on things, how to handle some stuff. So I was fortunate that he passed away last September, and last spring I went down to visit him in Florida. Spent about an hour or two with him and reminiscing about the '86 series and stuff like that. And Davey had a great career. The only guy to play with Hank Aaron and Sahada O. He had 40 home runs with the same team Aaron was on. And he was a hell of a player. He was a hell of a second baseman. Just a good guy, good friend.
That's great. It's too bad that he passed away. And so many people from those years. In '86, so you're having this incredible season, a lot of fun for the fans, just because it was so easy. But at the time of the fight, I think you were 14 games in front already. At the time that the night Eric Davis brawled, 14 games in front, and that was in July. It was such an easy year, such a total fun year, and I as a fan, I just had such a good time with it. And then the playoffs are starting, and everything was so easy. But now the playoffs are starting, and Mike Scott is pitching opening day for Houston, and in the LCS, there's a picture, Jay, of Mike up on the screen now, and now it's all everything's even when the playoffs start. It doesn't matter that you're 14 games in front. It doesn't matter.
Right, no question.
So the playoffs are starting, and you had a quote that said this was showtime. This was the big stage, and you wrote, "Reputations are waiting to be forged. We had to finish the deal and win the World Series, or else our year would be viewed as a failure."
Well, you remember, we won 108 games during the regular season, and if you don't finish the job, nobody remembers the 108 games you won. So that was we knew the pressure was on. There's a lot of pressure, not to get. If we had been eliminated by Houston in the first round, the luster would be really taken off the year we had.
Game 1, Scott pitches a shutout, 14 strikeouts, tops Doc 1-0. Game 2, Ojeda defeats Nolan Ryan. Keith a 2-run triple, so it's 1-1. Game 3, Backman singles and Dykstra hits the home run in the bottom of the ninth.
Right.
And the Mets win 6-5. And what was that? What was the excitement? Where were you then? What spot were you in? Do you remember?
In the press box. My routine. I would stay in the press box until the 8th or 9th inning, especially in postseason games. I would go down, and the club has to be ready to organize any interviews that the media would want to be ready, because we had what you would call a press room then, and we have to bring the winners if we won or lost. The manager go in the press room and the stars of the game. I remember at that game, at Dykstra's game, I got him on the next day on NFL Today because of the home run. So we got a double bounce. Lenny did the interviews that day, and Sunday he was featured on the NFL Today because of the home run.
What stands out is the quote that is in the book, where Lenny says it's the first time he hit a game-winning home run since Stratomatic.
Well, that was Lenny. Yeah, it was weird, and it was a pretty emotional series, and he had coming back, and I think Dave Smith was the guy who gave up the homer. So we were fortunate to win. I mean, everybody talks about the World Series, and for me, the Houston series was much more spine-tingling because, we didn't want to face Scott in Game 7 because we had the perception that Mike, who was a good friend, was scuffing the ball, and we did really nothing against him in 2 games. That's why we had so much added pressure to win Game 6. Don't forget, we were losing 3-0 in the 9th inning of Game 6. We rallied, and then Billy Hatcher hit the home run, and we came back. And then in the 16th inning, they had cut the deficit to 7-6, and Jesse struck out Kevin Bass to end the game.
Well, in the bottom of the 16th, well, top of the 16th, Mets, they scored 3 runs, and it was over, right?
Right.
And I remember riding home, and there was traffic, and either staying at work as late as possible. But then when you an extra inning game in those days, you didn't know when it was going to end, so you didn't want to be there all night.
Right.
But I wanted to stay to the end, and so I get in the car, and the Verrazano Bridge is there. You can hear that everyone's got their radio on. You can open your window, and you can hear the game. And in the top of the 16th, Darryl doubles. Knight singles, and goes to third in a wild pitch. Backman walks, another wild pitch, and Knight scores. Finally, after Orozco sacrificed, Dykstra singles, and they're up 7-4. And now it's the bottom of the 16th inning, and they're up by 3 runs. So where's your head now? Where were you? And were you running?
I was in the locker room from the 8th inning on, sitting really in one place, and that's really when we. When we won, went ahead, I thought the game was over, But I'm just gonna get some water. Mark, hold on 1 second.
Right.
Give me a second.
Sure.
Yeah. So, I thought the game was over, but then, then they scored 2 runs, and they have first and second and 2 outs. And if you remember, there was the greatest mound meeting in the history of baseball.
There we go.
Keith and Gary Carter told Jesse, to basically, if you throw another fastball, we'll kill you. And Jesse threw another curve and struck Bass out. Thankfully.
Yeah, thankfully. Yeah, that was pretty amazing when that happened. And that was the best mound meeting in the history of baseball. But you put in the book, it was a great quote in the book before he struck out Bass on the 3-2 pitch. What was the city like? And you were in Houston, but what was it like?
People were stopped in the Times Square. I was told the story that the people stopped in TV stores watching the game. That really, for those, I think the game lasted about 6.5 hours. The city stood still, and we kind of mesmerized the whole city, and that's why I think we got onto a bad start in the World Series, because I think we had a little baseball withdrawal after, taking it to the 6th game, because it was a tough series. And the Astros were a great team, but it was, it was just, I thought the especially Game 6, because I just felt that if it had to go to Game 7, we might have been in trouble because Mike Scott had our number.
How is it after the game, after Game 6? Now you were doing the press stuff back to New York and everywhere else. So, and it was late.
Right. I was in the locker room in Houston arranging interviews. We didn't have as much media as there is today now. Just get the guys to do the interviews with the beat writers, like Fred's own guys, deceased now guys like Jack Lang and Maury Allen and Dave Castellano, and arrange for the radio interviews. So I was blessed to have a very, accommodating bunch of players, and we got through it.
I always had the feeling that the New York press, that they were Met fans. When the writers that covered the team, and I can understand because they got to know the players and they felt the closeness to the players through the years and through the season and through the years.
Well, why they liked us was our guys had personality. You had Darryl and Doc, the little guys, Wally and Lenny Dykstra, Kevin Mitchell's and the Ray Knights of the world, and Davey. The press loved Davey because Davey never shied away from a quote. He wasn't afraid to be bold and bodacious, and because they knew once they walked into our locker room that they were going to get a good, they would get stuff to fill up their notebooks.
Yeah, right. Especially after something like that, and there was a rush, I guess, to get newspaper stories out. I think it was a day game, right? It was a day game, but it was in Houston, so you had the delay but then you had 16 innings. So I guess there was time to get the stuff into the newspapers, to get all the information in there.
Yeah, we got him out, but
what was the plane ride like?
The plane ride was a little bit crazy. We kind of destroyed the plane. One of the airlines wanted us to pay $10,000 for the stuff we did on the plane, and Davey told our Mets people he wasn't going to pay. The guys had won a big series, and he didn't want anybody to lose any money. Now is Davey sticking up for his team.
He always stuck up for the team.
Well, it was
always
a very
supported the team.
rambunctious ride back home.
Yeah, it was, it was. I guess it was one of the greatest rides ever. It was. It had to be so satisfying.
You couldn't really sleep on the plane, Mark. There's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of noise, a lot of good partying and stuff. Yeah, it wasn't a plane ride to sleep on.
So now you go to the World Series. Now, it was anticlimactic in my head, and it had to be in a lot of. I mean, the World Series was won. In my opinion, the World Championship was won after that Houston game. It was so wonderful. And how could that be topped? Man, it was topped. It couldn't be topped, and it was topped, which was so astounding. So you've got the World Series started. And you told me a story that you ran into Tom Seaver, who was on the Boston bench, and you talked about the first time you guys met. Do you remember
the first time we met, it was yeah, sure. It was in the trading room at St. Pete. It was we got traded back from the Reds. I was a young kid just out of college, had a new suit on and new shoes, and Tom was in the whirlpool. And I walked over and introduced myself. I said, Mr. Seaver, I'm Jay Horwitz, the Mets PR guy. And the kid, come closer, I can't hear you. So Tom had a great sense of humor. What he did, he took the hose from the whirlpool down my pants, and my shoes and pants were ruined. And I was talking to the great Tom Seaver. I didn't mind, but and Tom grew to be a great friend. And yeah, I worked with Tom when he was an announcer, when he was a club ambassador. So I got to know Tom pretty well and his whole family, and that was my first introduction to Tom Seaver.
And now he's on the Reds. It was so upsetting in a way that he wasn't. I didn't think about it until after, because the objective was to win the World Series. And in the back of my mind, or I was not in the back, but I knew that Seaver was on the Red Sox team, and I think he ran out when they introduced all the players. I think he did. I don't know if he was in uniform. But
yeah, he was hurt at the time. He was on the disabled list. That's why he didn't pitch.
But he was in uniform.
Yes, he was. He was.
Do you remember what the crowd reaction was? I don't.
He's got a big hand. Tom always got a big hand in New York, you know. And he had a back and forth with Buddy Harrelson, and Buddy was coaching third base for us, and he and Tom were roommates with the Mets, so they would have a little discussion back and forth with them.
Oh, that must have been fun to watch. It was nothing during the game or during the game. Was there stuff during the games?
It was during the game, and when the Mets were up, you know, Tom would stand in the dugout and yell at Buddy, and Buddy would yell back at Tom.
That's great. That's great. It just shows how ball players are people also. When stuff like that. Now there's too much camaraderie. I think there's too much now in the field with the laughing and the high-fiving the other guys. That didn't take place in those years. You didn't see it really on the field.
No, it was kind of frowned upon, Mark, to be honest with you. It's kind of frowned upon.
Not anymore, though, right? Not anymore.
No, sir.
Yeah. Well, Tuffle makes an error in game one. They lose 1-0. Darling pitched a great game. They lose 1-0. That particular night, we had to go out with a couple for dinner or something, which we had planned, and I didn't want to do it because of the World Series. And so I was going to try to stay away from the score, but of course you can't do that. And I knew that something happened bad. I wasn't sure. And then when I watched the tape of the game, that was tough. But you commented that Tuffle stayed in front of his locker for 2 hours.
Yeah, Jimmy is a first-class guy. He answered all the interviews, you know, what happened, how the ball went through his legs. And in the World Series, the press is just magnified. And Tim didn't shy away. He stood there and faced the medicine. That's why he had a lot of respect. The guys didn't run away from that. And he admitted he made a mistake. And listen, we didn't get any hits that game either. So usually we're not going to get beat 1-0 many times. But he stood and took his medicine, and you know, we said, let's get him tomorrow. But unfortunately, we didn't win tomorrow either.
Right. And then Boston won game 2, 9-3. And you also mentioned that Dwight Gooden was like that, like Tuffle. After he lost his game, Dwight didn't pitch well in the World Series.
pitched better in the playoffs, but Dwight, every time we needed him for interviews, he was right there and never ran, never hit. In Boston had a very small press room, and we would have to walk down to the bullpen and down to talk, and Dwight, he was always there. And that's why the guys loved Dwight and Darryl. In all their good times and bad times, they never ran, Mark. They just stood up and faced the medicine.
Yeah, that's something else. They lost game 2, both games at home. That's down 2-0, and they're going on the road. And Malcolm Moran wrote in the Times, the fact of our 108-win season was feeling like an albatross across our necks. In the space of one weekend, everything is going wrong. Is that how the team felt? Were they down?
Well, we felt that the pressure of winning 108 games and getting swept in the World Series, what's your legacy going to be? You know what I mean? So that's what the pressure was. The rest of the league hated us because we got into fights. We were bold. We weren't afraid to tell people how good we were, and it kind of grated on people. I guess the feeling was, if we don't finish the job, how are we going to be remembered?
Right.
That's what the feeling was on the team.
It's almost like another team that won all those games, the Cleveland Indians, 1954, and then after setting all sorts of records, then they lose the World Series.
They get swept by the Giants.
Yeah, it's free.
Yeah.
That was, so you're down 2 games to zip, and Davy Johnson cancels the practice before game 3. Now this is they went up to Boston. It was a day off, and the team travels up to Boston, and all the Boston press and the world press, and New York press, everyone's there, and they want to talk to players. And Davy had the audacity to cancel a practice. No media. So how do you express that to the press?
We
how
went.
Do you tell them?
I felt what Davey wanted to do. We came with Ron Darling and Bobby Ojeda. Came to his field that day with Davey and Mel Stottlemyre. Davey just felt that the guys needed a breath of fresh air away from the field, and it proved out to be probably one of the best decisions he ever made. Because we needed a break, and we wound up taking 2 and 3 from the Red Sox Fenway Park.
Well, you were involved in that decision.
I had to go to the late Katie Feeney, and listen, I worked for the club. Whatever Davey wanted to do, I carried out the mission. And they said, Katie, Davey just feels that the guys need a break, and they're not going to be here. They weren't happy, but they accepted it.
So then comes game 3, and it worked, like you said.
Which that worked.
And game 3, it worked. Dykstra hits a home run, and Ojeda pitches great. And in game 4, Carter hits 2
that game. So Dave, he goes back to his old home. He's a Red Sox. He got it from the Red Sox the winter before. Bobby was a big game for him to pitch well in his hometown. And Bobby's one of the unsung heroes of the postseason because he won game 2 of the playoffs after we lost game 1 and won game 3 of the World Series after we lost the first 2. And Bobby doesn't get the credit he deserves, going forward.
He was always very quiet. I've seen him nowadays. He does some of the post-game stuff, or he has done. Am I wrong? Did he do some of the post-game stuff for a while?
Yeah, he used to work at SNY, but not anymore.
Right,
not anymore.
Right. Yeah, and he had an accident where someone died.
Yeah, the boating accident too. When he was with Cleveland, unfortunately, 2 guys were killed on the boat.
Yeah. So now Doc loses game 5, and that's where he said to you, Jay, whatever you need me to do, I'll do before meeting the press. He said, I know these guys have a job to do. And that
was him. That was him. He had responsibility. He knew he had a big name, and he knew he had to face the media, good times or bad times, and that was Dwight. There's a lot of responsibility pitching in New York, especially a young kid with a big reputation, and he never shied away from the fact that he had an obligation is to speak to the media.
And he's never shied away from anything since. He's always
no excuses.
He just
and with all the problems he's had off the field, he's never shied away from that. He's always spoken about them, and both Darryl and Dwight are both doing well now, so which is good.
It's great. We had a promotion once where it was a Doc Gooden bobblehead day that our company sponsored, and we got to pick out who would throw out the first pitch of that. And we picked a kid from Staten Island who had lost a family member in Hurricane Sandy. And Dwight Gooden sat with that kid in the dugout talking to that kid for must have been 15 minutes. And he just sat there with the kid.
And that's Dwight. That's Dwight.
And
Dwight.
then,
He could.
and then there was a part of the promotion that's supposed to put a sign up saying something good about our company, and it wasn't there. So I said to Catherine Marquette, "There's nothing. Where's the sign? It's part of the deal. The sign." And then I said, "You know what? If you can't find the sign," she tried to get the sign. I don't know who she was talking to, texting. "If you can get Dwight Gooden to come up to the suite, we had a suite. It was part of the deal. A suite for that game, the day of the promotion." Dwight comes up, and I'm sure Catherine asked you to work. I don't know if you can't remember that one, but ask
I don't.
if you can get Dwight Gooden to come up to this to see the customers that were up there that we had up there. They all loved that idea of being there. And then he came up and signed autographs and took pictures. And he was such a gem, such a gem.
Dwight. He's a good fellow, Mark. He's got a good heart. He's got a big heart. He's a good guy.
But let's get to the end of Game 6, because that was the some of the greatest moments of my life. I'm not saying it was of your life. It may have been, but a lot of Met fans, that was quite an amazing. You could watch it. Doesn't matter how many times you see it. In the bottom of the fifth, the Mets are down 2-0. They tie it up, and then Carter later on, they're down by another run. And it's a sacrifice fly on a 3-0 pitch with the bases loaded. Ties the score at 3. I was annoyed at that time because
that was Game 7, I think, wasn't it?
No, this is Game 6. This is the Mookie Buckner game.
Okay, you're right.
This is
the
Mookie Buckner game.
Right.
So it scores tied at 3, and it goes to the bottom of the 9th now, and they have a chance to win the game, but they don't. And in the top of the 10th, Henderson hits a home run, and Barrett gets a hit, and the Red Sox are up 5-3. What was going on? Right. Now, you were running from the press box to the clubhouse. What were you doing?
I was in the clubhouse from the 7th inning on. I was sitting in Davy's office with Keith and Darryl Johnson, who's one of our scouts. And I remember saying to myself, how am I going to rationalize it to me, the team that had won, 114 games during the year, can't finish the deal? And I was going to move to go to the Bears, and that was when Gary, with 2 outs, gets a hit. And Keith said, "Don't you move, stay where you are." And then all of a sudden, Gary gets a hit, Ray Knight gets a hit, Kevin Mitchell gets a hit. We tied a game on Bob Stanley's wild pitch, and then the famous Mookie at bat and goes through Buckner's legs, and we win the game.
Yeah, it's quite an amazing thing. And Gary's quote was, "I wasn't going to make the last out."
Yeah,
which he didn't do, and then Kevin got his hit, and then Knight got the hit, and then all the insanity. So you're watching the game. The story, the legend is that Keith Hernandez, after he made the second out in the bottom of the 10th, he went into the clubhouse, had 2 Budweisers, and was sitting watching the game with you. Is that true? Office. Is that true?
Yeah, he was sitting watching it with me and Darryl Johnson in Davy's office. Yeah, and Keith to this day regrets not being on the field at the end of the game. He felt he should have been on the end, and he was in the locker room when the game ended. So we watched the game together.
So you're in there, and within maybe, I don't know, was it 10 minutes? It went from it's over, and your head was all, like you said, you have to tell the press.
Yeah, until we win the game, and people remember we didn't win the World Series that night. We still had another game to play, and we fell behind, 3-0 the next night. So we still had a job that we managed to come back and rally and win that one too.
Was it similar to winning Game 6 in the World Series? Was it similar to winning Game 6 in Houston, and then the World Series became anticlimactic? Whereas now in the World Series, Game 7 was almost anticlimactic. Maybe
we still had to finish the deal though, Mark. We knew the job wasn't done yet, and then the next night was rain, and Game 7 was 2 days later. So, but we knew we still had a job to do, and these guys were committed to winning, and we just knew we still had a job to do, and we just couldn't rest on our laurels of winning Game 6.
No, you couldn't. In Game 7, like you said, you were down 3-0, 3-0 in the sixth inning, and they
Right, and Keith
came
got a big
back,
hit,
got
knocked
a
it
big
2-1.
hit. Yeah. And then what else happened that game? Keith got his hit to make it 3-2, and then Carter got that a bloop single to right, and Keith thought it was going to be caught by Dwight Evans, so he got thrown out at second on a force play. But the tying run scored.
That was the last day. That was the last out of the inning.
Right. And then in the seventh, Knight hits a home run. And and watching replays of the game, after Knight hits a home run, and Darryl hits a home run. Right? Darryl hits a home run.
Darryl hits a home run in the eighth inning, if I remember correctly.
Right. And as he crosses the plate, Knight is talking to him. And
yeah, he's telling him to make sure he go over and thank Davey, because Darryl was upset the night before. He was taken out of the game for defensive purposes, so that didn't sit well with him, and he sulked a little bit. And Ray, always looking out for everybody, didn't want to have any friction between the two of them, and Darryl did go over and shake Davey's hand.
Why was Ray Knight gone after that year? He was the MVP of the World
Series.
Money,
contract talk. They just couldn't agree on a contract.
Was that a mistake?
You know, they just couldn't.
Well, they had Hojo.
I don't want to go back in time. They just Ray wanted a certain amount of money. The Mets wanted. See, we had Howard Johnson in the wings, so they were grooming Howard Johnson to take Ray's place at the time. He went to Baltimore and got more money than he would have gotten with the Mets. So
and it was just a matter of money. Yeah. And that was a great moment. I was at that game. What we did was we were able to buy a World Series tickets. There were four of us, myself, my brother, and my two cousins, four partners. And so we got the World Series tickets. We had to give some to customers. And then we drew lots on who would get tickets first. We each had one game. This includes the playoffs and the World Series. And I drew Game 7 of the World Series, which was not going to happen. This is the beginning of the playoffs. It wasn't going to happen. And and I was there. I was in right field when that Game 7 happened, which was on that Monday night. So the World Series is over. And what kind of press? What are you sending out now? What's your?
Well, we just tried to getting ready to parade the next day, and a couple of guys were on the Today Show, and unfortunately, we had this thing where Dwight missed the parade the next day, which was a little bit of a tumult. So just people getting ready. Maybe just getting ready to get people ready for the parade was the main thing we had to do after the game. Which was a great. Every time I see the parade, I get goosebumps. It was a great parade.
It's astounding. So the World Series is over, and what the Mets did, what they did to heads of departments, and you were the head of the PR department, according to your book, they offered $4,000 to you guys, to the heads of department. Right. What was that all about?
Well, that September, Keith and Ray Knight told me privately that if we win the whole thing, the players appreciate what you did for them during the year, and we're going to offer you a full share of the winner's share, which turned out to be $93,000. So after we won, I was called in the front office, and they said to me, have a choice of either, accepting the $4,000 as the department head, or $93,000 from the player's share. And my mom said, Jay, I didn't raise a schmuck. Take the $93,000. So I did.
So you did. That's pretty
good
did. Stuff. So a couple of other things. The Mets and the Yankees, of course, had their competition with each other, and you sent out, or you spoke to some sort of release that you're honoring Yogi Berra on the 25th anniversary of the '69 Mets. Why were you honoring him? Because
he was a coach. He was a coach on the team.
But the Yankees had they at that same time you were going to get back at the Yankees for something, because according to in the book, you were asked, why are you honoring Yogi Berra? And you said, oh, well, what do you, and you gave them an answer, and they said, what else are you going to do at Honor? And you said, well, we'll find something else to do, which I thought was pretty funny. And another thing you did was,
No,
go ahead.
he was a coach with the '69 team.
Right, right. Oh, I have a picture up with the '73 World Series, a picture that I found of Yogi. When Gary Carter signed with the Mets, that was the same time that Ricky Henderson signed with the Yankees. And there was a bit of one-upsmanship on signing Gary Carter.
Well, I don't know how accurate that is, Mark. I mean, listen, I was a competitor. I always liked to beat the Yankees in the back page, and certain things happened. It was a rivalry, natural rivalry between the two of us then,
Right, right.
But
so how did you deal with disappointments like Jason Bay? How did you, after he was in 2010, after he had 30 home runs with the Red Sox, all of a sudden he's not, it was terrible. What do you kind of press do you send out?
my philosophy was to never let how the team does interfere with how you do your job. I always try to be a professional, to do my job, forget about wins and losses, and just do the job the right way. And don't do anything to embarrass the ball club. And that was my whole philosophy. It's still my philosophy now, going forward.
How did you clean up the Ricky Henderson, Bobby Bonilla thing in 1999? The playing cards.
Yeah, he was. He wasn't everything. We didn't lie. We told him what happened, and in the process of losing to the Braves in Game 6, and Ricky and Bobby Bo were playing poker in the locker room, and it got out. And I said this market's such a tough market that if you lie or don't tell the truth, it's worth. Just tell the truth and get over it. It might be a one-day story, but just tell the truth and move on.
Now, I wanted to ask you something. I sort of passed it by. Your reputation as being a poor driver. So
I am a poor driver.
There was a story you told about George Bamberger, just before when he became manager of the Mets, and he asked you. He thought he was having a heart attack, and he asked you to drive him to the hospital. Do you remember that?
What happened was, we were at Shea Stadium. Excuse me, Mark. Shea Stadium was a light snow flurry. I got George in the car. I backed down to my space, and I proceeded to run over my glasses. So I drove to the hospital with my hand out the window, and it turns out George didn't have a heart attack. He had indigestion. And he said, I'll never, ever drive with you again. And so we didn't make it to the hospital with a kind of a bumpy ride, but George said he wasn't going to drive with me anymore after that.
Can't blame him, right? One of the previous times with George, you used to do interviews, post-game interviews, in the car with I guess a cassette recorder. And is that right?
And George didn't like the interviews, so he got so disgusted with me one trip. He took my tape recorder, threw it out of the car, and that was the end of the interviews that night.
Oh yeah, fun stuff. It's so great knowing you, and it was so great speaking to you and hearing your words. And I had a great time with this. Love to do it again because there's so much more stuff. It's one of the funnest baseball books that I've read. And I've read.
Well, I appreciate it.
I've Met stuff. I'm a Met stuff. Going back to Can't Anyone Who Played This Game, the Jimmy Breslin book in 1963.
Yeah, Mark, let me say one thing about my book. The reason I wrote my book is I had a chapter about my late assistant, Shannon Ford, who passed away from cancer at the age of 44. It'll be 10 years this March. And I just want to let people know about Shannon, what kind of person she was, a mother of 2 young kids. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, to let the people know what she was about. And, if anything, that's my favorite chapter in the book.
Oh. Yeah, people have to read that book. It's just, if you're a Met fan or if you're a baseball fan, it's one of the books. There's a great picture that just popped up with you and David Wright, where you're in David Wright's uniform. And
that was before the WBC. He was going off to play third base, and I got into his uniform, and we had a little fun with that. I said, David, nobody's going to miss you. I'm going to take your place at third base.
Right. There was another one where it's showing now a picture of you in the press box, which is just a great classic picture. of you sitting there with and it's your press box, the Jay Horwitz press box. This is, I don't know, it's afterwards, you were honored with naming it that, or it was before it. But
Yeah, it's a great honor. I mean, it's just, so many good PR people before me, and to know you made some kind of a contribution to the club is something I'll take going forward. And, it's just, it's glad after it's all well and done that I had some kind of an impact on the team and to be remembered. I've never been an I guy, Mark. I do my job, not look to go in the forefront, and when stuff happens, I just gotta say thank you for people to making it happen.
There's a funny picture. Ev, go back to the Francisco Rodriguez scoreboard thing. Go back another one, please. More. That's it. Nope. Next one, back to that one. Jay, I just put on a picture. Now the other one. Ev, go to Francis, the one you had. That's it. Stop. There was when Francisco Rodriguez punched his father-in-law in the clubhouse. How did you deal with that?
Yes, he did.
How do you tell the press? What do you? He was going to be the star. He's the number one relief pitcher.
Again, I go back to the same premise: don't lie. You just tell them what happened. People knew, and we told them what happened. And there were a lot of extraneous circumstances in regard to that. Frankie had some family problems that kind of spilled over. And what he did was wrong, but there were some extra different circumstances involved with that.
Still, I'm done. Jay, it was great talking to you, and I just love it. I love to do it again. I'd like to get together again.
All right, sorry for the screw up with the pictures and stuff. I hope you guys got something out of it.
Great. We're not done yet. Evelyn, you got to take it.
We have a few questions for Jay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, Jay, let's start with this. Please tell us about Sid Finch.
Oh, I forgot about Sid Finch. Oh, got so distracted. Oh, I don't believe that was one of the main stories. Thanks, Damien, for bringing that back.
So this is the winter of '85. We get a call from Frank Cash's secretary, Gene Cohn. They have Sports Illustrated on the line. The great. They came up with the idea. George Plimpton came up with the idea. They wanted to have an April Fool's story, and George made up a story that the Mets were going to sign the 6'7" yoga playing, flute playing guy who loved yoga, and he's going to go to spring training with the Mets, and he's going to be on the April Fool's edition of the program that year. What people didn't realize was that the first paragraph of the opening paragraph said, "This is an April Fool's story," and nobody picked it up. So we went to spring training, and Sid meeting with the guys. He was 6'7", maybe 180 pounds. He was a school teacher from Chicago, and we kept it going for a couple of days. And I remember I got a call from the sports editor of one of the New York papers saying, "Why did you guys give Sports Illustrated that great story? It should have been our story." And one of the scouts called me. I never heard of this guy. And then after a while, it became who it was, and we retired his number a couple of days later at Outlying Stadium. So you couldn't do that today because in this age of Twitter and Instagram and X, whatever the hell, you couldn't keep a secret that long. But we kept it going for a couple of days, and we set the baseball world on its feet for that period. And I just so this was the 40th anniversary this year, and we actually got Sid Finch came to New York. We had a little press stuff with it, so it's good to revisit that stuff. I always enjoyed being a part of that.
It was the idea of 106. Excuse Damien. Let me get brought it all back to me. Thanks. 168 mile per hour fastball. So how did you prove that, Jay? What was the proof of that?
Well, it was all in the story. It was all part of the story.
Well, it was a real thing. It was a prop. There was a prop. What was the prop?
Well, the whole story was a prop.
The catcher's mitt.
Yeah, we burnt a hole in the glove of catcher Ron Reynolds, one of the catchers then, and we told the press that this was Sid's fastball, a curveball, and again, we kept the story going for a couple of days.
Yeah, that part of it really triggered it. Damien, thanks for bringing that up again. And I apologize for skipping it, for missing it.
Jay, we got another question. Of all the games you've been involved with, what would you consider your greatest game?
My greatest game? I would go back to Game 6 of the game against Houston because knowing the circumstances, we're losing 3-0. Have to face Mike Scott in Game 7. He beat us badly the first 2 games. We knew if we lost the game, we would have to face him in Game 7. Probably wouldn't win. And we came back from a 3-0 lead and top of the 9th inning. And then after Patrick don't run to tie it up, we went ahead, came back again, and almost lost. And that's probably for pure excitement. That was probably my game of all time.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Ev, are there more questions?
There's 2 that Damien will read, 2 questions in the chat box. Mark, were you going to ask Jay about the greatest game ever?
Well, that was at the beginning. Yes, I was. Yes, I was.
Okay.
That was at the beginning of the presentation because we just didn't. I just forgot about that one also. Jay, we were talking about. We're showing a picture of Johnny Unitas in the 1958 Giants Colts game, where
right,
which you wrote that it's the greatest game of your ever.
Yeah, my father was a big Giants fan, and we had seats in the game, section 17, and Alan the Horse and Michi ran out us in overtime, and we had tied the game at 17. We lost 23-17. That was, a lot of people say that was the beginning of pro football, as we know it today.
You were a New York Giant baseball fan, big time.
I loved Willie Mays, and I loved the football Giants. My dad was a big football Giant fan and baseball Giant fan, and he got me indoctrinated. And one of the joys of this job is being able to meet Willie Mays and consider him a friend. And I'm very friendly with his son Michael, and we were honored a couple of years ago to retire as number 24.
How did you feel when the Giants moved? The baseball Giants moved to San Francisco. Heartbroken.
I went to Philadelphia a couple of times, and when there was no Mets there, we used to go to Philly, and I met Willie one time at Connie Mack Stadium, and thanks to Rusty Staub, I got to meet Willie when I was at the Mets, and having considered Willie a friend was something I'll never forget.
That's wonderful to have a friend, someone on that level,
yeah.
Which is really terrific.
Yes, sir.
Anything else I forgot, Damien?
Yeah, no, that's okay. All right, Jay, Jeff Cohen wants to know, after the regular season, when the Mets don't make the playoffs, we usually see you on the field during the playoffs. Are all PR directors required to work the playoffs, or does MLB
No,
ask?
they're not. I used to like to do that. I did that from about 1980 to 2008, just to help out. You learn things. If you work the postseason, you pick up things. And I kind of stopped when the Phillies won the pennant, the World Series, and I'm on the mound helping Jamie Moy and Jimmy Rollins do interviews. I said, that's it for me. I'm just going to stick to my team. So I kind of stopped doing that in, I think, 2008, 2009. But I used to like it. You have the camaraderie with the other PR guys for the league. And, I said, that was enough for me. I did it probably about 20 years.
Yeah, thanks.
Sure.
And is it true that Ray Knight was offered a contract the day of the 86 World Series parade?
The day before. I was in Ray Knight's room that night. He was offered the day before, and he decided the money wasn't good enough, so he didn't take it.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot, Jay.
Sure, no problem, guys.
Anything else out there? Any other questions?
No, that's it for the chat.
Well, it's my pleasure, guys. I appreciate the time.
Oh, it's great.
We
Thanks, Jay.
appreciate you, Jay.
Okay,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you. Appreciate
Okay.
it. Bye.
Okay.
Okay, Mark, that was great.
It was a good one.
Thank you.
It worked out really good. Good job. All of us worked together on it.
Okay. There's some cheers here. I don't know if you could see them on the screen, Mark.
Yeah,
And
I
if
saw it
anybody
scribble up
has
there.
any questions, you can raise your hand now because Jay is gone. So I don't think anybody's going to talk over each other. And Damien, you could monitor if anybody
Yeah.
does raise their hand.
Yeah.
You could choose. Thank you. Oh, Jeff has his hand up.
Hi, yes, thank you. It was a great presentation. Fun fact, I was Jay Horwitz's intern back in 1984, so that was great memories. Mark, I wanted to ask you, you put out a lot of bobbleheads. Which one was most the one you liked the most?
Well, the Piazza bobblehead was a nice one. That was the first one we did. And it seemed like there was a curse. Whoever we made a bobblehead the following year, they had a bad year, whether it was Kaz Mitsui. Piazza's career was over after we did his. Mitsui was over. K-Rod, you saw what happened. He punched his father-in-law. And Jason Bay didn't make it. And everyone, it's really LaDuca, after he had that great 2006 year. And then we made him the 2007 bobblehead. And his career was over shortly after that. He had some issues, some problems to end his career. And so there was a great bit of press we got from the curse of the bobblehead, which is pretty funny.
Mark, Steve Meyerson has a question.
Yes. Will the chapter be doing another in-person meeting in Manhattan March or April of this year? And what do you have planned?
Well, we were thinking, we have begun discussions. Yes, there will be another in-person meeting. It might be at Finity's again. I don't know if some of you know that December 20th, several of us attended Gary Mintz's and Steve Summers' event there. And it was a big success. Like I said, several of us were in attendance, and we thought, if we invite Steve Summers, we haven't done any of this. This is just in the works. Then at least he won't get lost if he agrees. So yes, we will have an in-person in a central Manhattan location. If you have any ideas of people who would love to either be a guest speaker or make a presentation, you could email any one of us. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay, I don't see any raised hands, but thank you everyone for
well, one
sharing
comment,
Sabre Day.
One comment that I heard for the first time a couple of weeks ago. All my years, I thought there were 4 seasons. And a couple of weeks ago, I found out there were only 2 seasons, baseball and waiting for baseball.
You don't think to ask us how they died?
Right, and I just want to remind, or am I muted?
No, we could hear you.
Oh, okay.
You're good.
I just want to remind everyone, if anyone wants to contact the chapter, it's questions-comments@sabrnyc.org.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, you want to give that one more time, Kev?
questions-comments@sabrnyc.org.
Terrific. Thanks.
It's at the bottom of our website.
And you just redid the website?
No, it's
upgraded it.
Updated, yeah.
Updated. So everyone who's on this Zoom call, please visit the website.
Evelyn, if anyone wants to join SABR, just sabr.org and they'll get all the information.
Yes, and that's also on our website. If anybody who's not a member sees the website, there is a link. You click it, and that takes you to National SABR.
That's it. And the National Convention is in Cleveland at the end of July. Okay.
All right, I think this. Yes, well, a lot of people might want to run to the Baltimore Sabre Day if they're still going.
Maybe we'll see. Maybe we'll see Pete Alonso.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
One. Okay, I'm about to close now. These Zoom, meetings end abruptly, but Kevin, I think you could end it. Mine just says leave the meeting.
Yeah, I could do it.
Okay,
Thank
thanks
you,
again,
everyone,
everyone.
again.
Okay, take care.
Gotcha.
Did great,
Night
Mark.
all.
Thank you,
you.
Mark.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thanks, Ed.
Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Night all.
Heroic.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.